I am very thrilled to introduce to you Dr. Ed Scanlon. He's an associate professor in the School of Social Welfare, and Ed has done some really wonderful work looking at gleaning at the Society of St. Andrew, and I'm really excited to hear what he has to say about this today, particularly coming off of Pastor Teskey's references to gleaning earlier. So thanks again, and welcome to Ed Scanlon.
Thank you very much, Simran. It is, I think, well situated between Pastor Teskey's comments and right before, I don't see Rachel up here, but somebody talking about applied work in Quindaro. And I think these kinds, it's well situated because it's such an important part of health. So let me talk to you just a little bit as I get started about what is Society of St. Andrew. Society of St. Andrew is a national faith-based nonprofit that attempts to meet nutritional deficits by connecting faith communities, civic organizations, and businesses to opportunities to glean food left behind by farmers and orchard owners. It was founded in 1979, and they have, over this time, gleaned billions of pounds of food. They target two main points of large volume waste: farmers' fields after harvest, and packing operations where produce is prepared for shipping to markets. I know nothing about farming. I know nothing about kind of the food industry. I came into this study at the request of this organization after they opened their Kansas City offices to help them just sort of look at their internal operations. So almost everything I know about farming is from Green Acres, the TV show. So it really didn't prepare me well for some of the things I was going to encounter. So since they began tracking their donations, they have produced more than 622 million pounds of produce to serve people in need, which is equivalent to more than 1.8 billion servings. And they do this really at pennies a pound. They do it in an incredibly cost-effective way. In 2008, they opened their Kansas City headquarters, and they wanted to tap into, SOSA is located in a place called Big Island, Virginia, and they had never had anything west of the Mississippi before, and so this was the first attempt for them to move into the western states, and they call themselves, this is the western headquarters of Society of St. Andrews, but for the purpose of our conversation today, I'll be calling it SOSA West, which is sort of their shortened term. Since they've started, they've already donated more than 7.5 million pounds of fresh fruits and vegetables to Harvesters, which is the food bank in Kansas City, and to its area partner agencies. Okay, so why did we do this study? We know a whole lot about how much they produce, but we didn't know as much about what kind of effects that they have. And those of you who are in the social service or healthcare side of this know that good intentions aren't really good enough for funders. They want to know, is this thing working, right? So we did a little process evaluation to see if we could figure out how would we know that it was working. So we started with some what we call qualitative research. And basically, there were a few questions we wanted to ask. How do the various stakeholders perceive the organization? And that went from the growers to the people who finally actually consume the food, okay? And why are they involved? What motivates them? What are their strengths and assets of the organization? And what could it do to improve its services? So I won't go into all the boring detail about my methodology, but basically we decided that trying to survey all these different constituencies was going to be very difficult and we weren't even sure what we would survey them on. So we decided to go with a qualitative design, which means I just went and talked to people and heard their stories. And we did that in two ways. We did focus groups with the growers, focus groups with the volunteers who were gleaning, with the agencies that actually got the food, which were food pantries. And then I went and met with consumers at two food pantries to talk with them about what the nutritional assistance meant to them, how they sort of made ends meet without food, how much fruits and vegetables they were getting on a regular basis, and things like that. And they were the most terrific people, and their stories are are really heartbreaking about, we just ate this delicious squash, and what a piece of squash or what an apple means to them is expanded so much beyond what it might mean to most of us sitting in this room today. It's pretty amazing. Okay. So who were these gleaners then? One of the groups that we interviewed were gleaners. And who were they? They were volunteers who participated in the gleaning of a field or orchard at least once in the previous year. The focus group was comprised of 9 women and 1 man. Everybody who came to this first focus group was Caucasian. One of the goals of the organization is to try to be more diverse, is to try to increase its diversity of gleaners. So they're reaching out more into communities of color in Kansas City to try and increase that. And they're also trying to reach outside of Christian groups. The group was almost entirely made up of, well, it was entirely made up of Catholics, Lutherans, and Methodists, and then one woman who I think was an atheist but didn't want to admit it in front of everybody else and just wanted to go help. And she was amazing. So they're now have been reaching into the Jewish community and other non-Christian faiths. So what were their motivations for getting involved in this? Why? This is not, as I'm going to talk about, this is not easy work. The halls, I guess, aren't here anymore, are they? What they were talking about in terms of how intense this work was echoed by these folks. So they were involved because of their religious convictions, the immediate impacts of gleaning, concerns about food waste, and what I found most interesting as a social worker, the win-win nature of gleaning. And I'll just tell you what they meant by that. So Mary, for example, says, well, in Christ, one of his strong beliefs was to care for the poor and those who could not care for themselves. There is such a sense of service. This is a way I felt I could help. Why not take on the servant role and help provide? So the stuff that we were hearing earlier from, I'm blanking on her first name, Miss Hall. Margie. Her words about the importance of that service. I don't know tons about the Bible. I'm just gonna be bottom line. I was raised Catholic, and we don't really read the Bible that much. So they kept talking about the biblical nature of gleaning, and I didn't understand that. And so I asked for clarification. I said, well, what do you mean? And so Bart said, this is part of the law. Deuteronomy and Leviticus tell us you should not pick all of the grapes from the grapevine, and you shall leave some for the strangers, for the widows and the orphans. We don't have the stranger or widows or orphans doing the gleaning, but it's the same thing. Interestingly, when I asked some folks, some of the various constituents, I was like, well, what are the downsides of this organization? One of the downsides for them was, particularly for the growers, they said it would be nice to have the consumers here helping with this process. So it wasn't just us giving to them, but that they were active participants. And of course, there's all sorts of logistical reasons why that might be difficult. But SOSA did take a group of women from a domestic violence shelter and brought them there, and they worked and brought food back to eat at the shelter. So that was kind of the first foray into sort of consumer participation in the gleaning process itself. The immediacy of this process is important to them too. It's immediate gratification for everybody. You're getting to do something immediately, and you're helping just knowing that they're going to get the produce and that it's healthy food. Like in my job, seeing so many people in need, this is just a success, I think. Anybody who's done volunteer work, that, or any kind of social service work, that you don't necessarily see immediate results, right? And a lot of times as social workers, we say, well, we're just planting seeds, which ironically, right, given this topic, but we're just planting seeds and hopefully we'll see these things later. But this was the kind of thing where people were into it because they were like, I can go get food now, bring it back to my church's pantry or get it to harvesters, and it's fast, it's going to happen immediately. There was a lot of concern. Many of the people got involved because of their concern about food waste, and because of their concern about Americans and especially lower income Americans, over-reliance on quick fast foods and overly processed foods. So I would say that when I heard about it, well, I've been concerned about people not having access to fresh foods. And so there again, it just makes sense to go out and get food that otherwise would go to waste. Then make sure that people who really need it can have it. The win-win nature of this. The idea here was that there seemed to be no reason not to glean. The farmers wanted to participate in this process, but they can't, it's cheaper for them, if they know that they're not going to be able to sell produce, it's cheaper for them to plow it under, quite frankly, than it is to take the money it costs to hire day laborers to come and do this for them and get this food picked, right? So it's really cheaper for them, but they don't want to waste their food. Farmers don't like to waste food, and they don't go into farming to watch their crops plowed under. It's one of the things I learned about farming. So the farmer gets helped. Harvesters and the food pantries, they get helped because they get these donations. The consumers, the hungry people, get to eat it, and gleaning itself is fun, so everybody wins. I've been in social work for 25 years now, and so since I was 7, because I'm only 32. No, I'm not. I've seen tons of volunteers in all kinds of different things. I've never in my life seen a group of volunteers this excited about their work. They were the most passionate, engaged, thrilled about what it is that they were doing, and so kind. And one of the things that they said was how much they benefited from the process, that they felt it was a gift to be able to go and do this. And then, again, this reminds me of what Marguerite was saying earlier. This group was so amazing. I wrote a grant for this, and I had a $50 gift card for all the participants. And so I came in with this group with my 10 $50 gift cards, and when I went out to get a form that I needed to write down who was getting the money, I came back and they said, we want to donate the money back to SOSA, so would you just give the money back to SOSA? I mean, just really decent people. So how did they benefit? Again, the excitement of immediate results, the physical nature of the work and being part of nature, and the development of community and the ability to educate their young people. Again, I thought this was going to be a rough week, but it was so rewarding when they came back and told us that we had picked something like 4,000 pounds of potatoes in 2 hours. And we filled trucks. The farmers would drive up with their trucks and we just kept filling the truck beds. That was such an exhilarating moment for them. This is a youth group that she brought. And the next day they were ready to go again. And they actually did this thing, I don't know all the particulars, but it's called Harvest of Hope, and it's a particular event where they actually drove a distance to participate in this. And then the physicality of it. It was exhilarating, just sticking my hands in the ground and not caring. People liked the idea of doing something in their volunteer work that was active. Katrina said, again, I think the physical aspect, hard labor is good for you. I think people don't realize that. We've become a very lazy society. When you get out and physically work so hard, you don't realize how rewarding it is until you actually get out there and do it. And somebody else said, I sleep really good after a cleaning. So, this is a very kind of in-depth quote, but this community development piece. The cool thing with Harvest of Hope is that you work with a different church. 2 different denominations came together. We went to a different denomination every day for lunch and worked with those communities. It was a very big learning experience for our kids coming together, and this is such a biblical thing to do. Then just learning, they taught all week long about how nutrition just starts depleting as the food travels across the United States, and how most of our food travels at least 1,500 miles before it gets to a grocery store. So the nutritional value is just gone. That really inspired our kids. We had to do short-term goals, personal goals, then a short-term group goal, and a group long-term goal. Our group long-term goal was to plant our own garden and feed the hungry, so that's what we're doing this summer. We'll be gleaning our own food. So just the kids learning more about nutrition, thinking about poverty, kind of understanding food as a corporate system, and understanding it in a systemic sense was helpful to this group. Okay, but there were a few challenges, and I just thought I'd throw this in because, again, this shows you their dedication. These folks were willing to do this over and over again, but it's not easy. So, exposure to sun and insects. Apparently farms, it's another thing I learned, they have insects, and there's a lot of sun that comes down, so it's not always easy to find a place to get shade. Some Congregations in the United States have, I think, probably an overrepresentation of elderly folks, and for some of the elderly folks, this work proved to be a little more daunting than they had expected. Hot sun coming down on them, people don't always remember to bring what they're supposed to. The coordinator, if any of you ever decide you want to call this organization, the coordinator's name is Lisa Owsley, and she always tells them that they need to make sure they wear long sleeves, that they need to wear like a wide brim hat, that they should bring water, but she doesn't communicate. They have it, each parish or congregation, they have a coordinator. And the coordinators aren't always as good about remembering to pass that message on to the direct participants. So some people get there and don't realize that cornfields are hot. I think this is common sense to remember this, but it's not. It's hard to think through everything. They always tell you to bring something for water and gloves and bug spray, sunglasses, sunscreen, and a hat. When you're out there picking corn, there's no shade, and some people may not understand that. The physical nature of it, while everything in our world, in our life, is a double-edged sword, right? So we can look at anything from two sides. They love the physicality of it, but it's challenging. You're stooping, bending, occasionally climbing up ladders when they're getting fruit from trees, and it's not easy work. So I was black and blue after picking corn as you push your way through the stalks. I had no idea that I would end up with bruises all up and down my arms and legs. It was really fun, but I had no idea. So people will walk away with a few scars. And then time challenges. Now here's the problem that they have logistically, and why SOSA West needs as many churches and other groups to be involved as possible. They get these gleaning notices sometimes at the very last minute. And so they have maybe a day or two to scramble to get a group of people together to come and do this work. And the farmers get it, but the farmers are a little frustrated by that too, because they say, well, when my peaches are ready, they're ready. And those soft fruits, with soft shell fruits, they don't hold up as well. And so they will go bad fairly quickly if you don't get the group, and we'll end up not being able to use them. So time is of the essence. And they don't keep it secret or anything. They get a phone call, the farmer says, okay, it's ready, but there can be bad weather or anything else. I think we get the most notice we can. And then the other issue is these gleanings, a lot of times they take several hours, and so that's a time commitment. But the other piece to it is that for this mostly Kansas City metro area-based congregations, there's not that many farms, within the boundaries of Kansas City, Missouri, so they're a drive. So this woman said, it's the nature of it. We don't have many farms in the middle of the city, so you have to go a distance. Like with my church, if we can try carpooling or something to try to help on that, it's not just the gleaning time. It might take you 2 hours to get there and 2 hours to get back. So you're really giving a very full day if you do this, right? It's a long day. So just in general, what I learned was it's very positive perceptions of the organization. They're struggling with their name because there are apparently a lot of people who use the term St. Andrews, and people don't necessarily know who this organization is. So they're actually contemplating a name change right now because they feel like the name doesn't reflect their mission. And that kind of came out in the interviews where people didn't, the food pantries that they were bringing food to, they had no idea until they came to the interview who they'd been getting the food from. They thought it was from a church in North Kansas City called St. Andrews. And it wasn't. It was from this organization. And I said, y'all need to really work on your name recognition because that's important in not-for-profit, that people know who you are and what you're doing. The time logistical issues, and that they just need more growers and they need more gleaners. And the organization really needs to develop a plan. This is a two-person shop in Kansas City, Lisa and an assistant. And as I said, it's probably up to about 8 million pounds now. They've produced about 8 million pounds of produce in the last 3 years, but it's a lot of work for just a couple folks. We also decided from this, because the reason we started this was because the funders were kind of saying, what are your impacts? And we decided that one of the things that was being impacted was the incredible positive impacts on the volunteers themselves. So we're developing a measure of volunteerism and its impacts, and we're going to kind of continue to survey the volunteers as they finish a gleaning, and hopefully get some more feedback to the organization of how they can improve the process and make it more accessible to more people. So that's kind of it. I know I kind of ran through that quickly and didn't tell you about a bunch of other things, but it was, the organization is not a pilot, but the study was a pilot because what they really wanted from me was, they said, the funders, they're getting money from the Kansas City Health Foundation, Greater Kansas City Health Foundation, and Walmart, and all just sorts of different organizations that give them something. There is, you know, I will get it to, do we have a list from this?
Everything will be.
But I will make sure that you get it. I'll get it to Simran if
Sure.
Um,
We'll put it on the ECM.
yeah. Yeah, but so the organization is thriving, the research is just sort of starting. Yeah.
I don't know if you've heard of the film, The Names of It.
Can you say more about it?
Yeah, it's a French film. The director is Edward Scanlon. And she's filming in France, and it's about tablets. And it's kind of sort of like an experimental documentary, so it's interesting formally, but like, and then there's also there's a book called The Ethics of Waste, where the author has a chapter about that film, about the practice of food generally. So it's meant to recommend to
Yeah.
anybody who's
I don't know if everybody could hear her, but she talked about this film, which is called The Gleaners and I, and then a book called The Ethics of Waste that actually talks about the film, and I will be sure to at least make sure I get to see the documentary. Thanks. Anybody else? Questions? Yeah.
My contact has been with Gleaners in Detroit, and they've been there 40 years
Yeah.
at least. But they also do canned goods and things left over from stores.
Stores.
Does this organization do the same, or do they have in
They,
the future want to move into those?
my understanding is that they only work with fresh food produce, but they have to really kind of be tricky because, not only do we have to think about the economics of all this, but there's also the politics of these not-for-profits. And they had to make sure when they came into Kansas City that none of the funders thought they were competing with Harvesters, because Harvesters is the big, it's the big name in town, and they're the ones that have been around forever. And so they wanted to do something that's value added, and Harvesters does a lot with canned goods and works a lot with grocers, but they weren't working too much with the fresh produce side. And so this has allowed, the Harvesters loves them because it's allowed them to bring in fresh produce that hasn't been seen in those warehouses for a while. The consumers, it just flies off the shelves. Yeah.
What's amazing is how quickly Harvesters can mobilize that fresh produce.
Oh yeah.
Within a day, within an afternoon, by the time the food comes in, they already have trucks ready to go and get it back out again. So even if it's past its prime, it doesn't get any more spoiled sitting around. They have a fantastic network.
It's amazing what they can send out an email and have 5,000 pounds of peaches gone in no time. Yeah.
So you said they were looking at expanding
West.
west. Now, for a state like Kansas that grows like field corn and soybeans, are they able to do something like that?
They've worked a lot with family farms in Kansas and organic farms and things like that. So I think it's going to probably vary state by state what kinds of things they can salvage and what kinds of food they can rescue.
Right. Yeah. I wondered if that would be a challenge for this state. I mean, well, the northeast side there's more
Consumer.
vegetable
Yeah.
produce. There's not in the western
Yeah.
state.
And they're going to have to figure out as they go west, because that's a lot of states. There's another 20 untouched states or whatever. And so they're going to have to be really thoughtful about, first of all, where they can find money and what areas make the most sense to try to get somebody on the ground to reach out to farmers. Yeah.
What's the age range of volunteers?
Oh, the age range of volunteers was from tweens, 11, 12-year-olds to 70s.
People are fit.
Yeah, people that fit. And there's different things that are, again, my farming knowledge, very shallow, but there are things that are easier to pull than others. I think when you're digging things out of the ground with a knife, that's kind of hard. That's kind of hard work when you're cutting out root vegetables. So I think it really varies based on the product. Yeah.
You did the study on the gleaning part of it. Have you done the study on how the people use it? And
Yes.
Because it seems to me that if I was doing this hard labor, I'd want to know, somebody tell me that the people were actually eating it. I ran a food pantry and I know what returned to me.
Yeah.
And it was some of the fresh stuff because they didn't know how to use it until I brought in a group, and I can't remember, it's a government group, where they teach people how to cook and
The
have
two-
classes. at
The
the
two
pantry.
pantries that I was working with, that I interviewed folks at, they do the exact same thing. They also one of them was St. James Catholic, Catholic Kitchens, whatever. Yes, I'm blanking on the right name, but they not only use food in their meals, their soup kitchen, but they also distribute as a food pantry, like you're talking about. And they do grocery sacks that they prepare, so prepared grocery sacks. And they would put in, if they had an unusual vegetable, they would put in a recipe card. Interestingly, one of the folks from Kansas, she's an organic farmer, and she grew bok choy, which she was just convinced was going to be a huge hit at the farmers markets. She's like, I was stuck with so much bok choy. So she gave it away, and the consumers told me about it. And they said, I'd never used it before, but I cut it up and I stir-fried it and I did this and this, and we loved it. So my impression of talking with them was that the waste was less than I would have expected, but that may have been a bias of the people who showed up for the interview. They may have been especially knowledgeable and enthusiastic. I can't tell you, though, how appreciative the consumers are. There's one quote, and I know my time's running out, so I'll make this quick, but there's a quote from this woman. When I asked her what the food meant to her, and people talked about that the food was helpful because they knew it helped their nutrition, their kids concentrated better. There were two older men that said it helped their digestion, which I totally did. This one woman said, well, it's really helpful for the mood of my family. And I said, well, what do you mean? And she said, well, it's just hard. She goes, I don't make much money, and sometimes there's not much in the house, and the mood gets so sad and tense, and my kids are so much happier when they have something sweet to chew on, like an apple, which broke my heart, that can make so much difference. But the relationship between food and the emotional functioning of a family and the stability of a family is not something that most of us stop to think about. So thank you so much for all your time and letting me come today. I appreciate it.